Video 1.
There's a thing about his back teeth, so
Yeah, I was gonna say, you didn't have any teeth.
None of them had teeth back then.
they had teeth.
They just fell out.
Your mom had teeth. Oh.
Wait, did you start the video when you said that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Alright. What's that? I mean, like whatever the restaurant has, or like black tea with sugar.
Oh, you mean like sweet tea?
Yeah, sweet tea. Yeah.
That's all like,
I mean, I'll have like. I mean, do I also drink like hot? I don't like green tea, but like breakfast, English breakfast tea, or like what's the other one? Crap. Earl Grey. I'll drink that. But like I don't like a lot of like a minty or weird stuff like. Like Earl Grey or breakfast tea. All right, moving on. Okay, but a lot of folks, green herbal tea is very widely available. I just not a fan. So like that's very widely available.
You just not like it because it's bitter.
Yeah, I just don't like the taste of it. So.
wait, you don't like
Okay, so coffee is coffee.
Yes.
I was about to say,
I cannot stand coffee.
I don't drink coffee.
Oh, coffee is
Coffee is the
Yeah.
bomb.
I don't drink
No,
coffee.
literally
I
iced
like
coffee.
I hate coffee. I
No,
don't like any
yeah,
version of
iced coffee is
coffee.
superior.
Tea's good. I do like tea.
when I
So
drink coffee, it looks like milk.
Yeah.
Oh my
Like,
God.
there's so much creamer in it.
No.
yeah, it's not even
You have
coffee.
to like wean yourself off of the milk. Like as a kid, mine looked like straight up milk. But like now, like as I got older, I like stopped
Okay.
using as much, and it was so good. Why are you telling me to stop when he's been asking questions the whole time?
You're just the last one talking. All right. Anyway, so we were saying yesterday, Malthus talks about there needs to be some kind of check. He's not calling for like the government to put a check like China or something like that, but he is talking about there needs to be some kind of check where there needs to be like a later or delayed marriage so you have kids later on. And you get some of that insight in his essay. Do you want to talk about or point out anything he brings up? And I know you've had talked about him before, but like any of his ideas or arguments?
Very flawed. Very flawed.
Yes, it's a very flawed idea, yes, which gets proven, but yeah.
I mean, it is the idea of like, I mean, if you look at the population chart, it's really scary because it's all of a sudden it's nothing and it shoots up.
Right.
But that's just exponential growth that, like, I guess it just wasn't followed all the way through because time and time again it's been proven that like, hey,
We meet that
more
demand,
grow,
basically, yeah.
we can always meet it with increased production.
Well, I think, too, for a long time, it probably wasn't true because a lot of the things they were doing, like for agricultural production or whatever, was not efficient enough to meet. But now with the way the changes are taking place and they're so rapid now that it was going to always probably be able to meet it. Yeah.
Did he use it? He incorrectly used like geometric for what, food or for population when he should have used arithmetic?
Basically for both.
Yeah, he used the wrong one for both, but I don't know which one he used.
Yeah, we don't worry about it. Yeah.
The first time I learned about him, it was in biology, and like he was actually right in terms of biology because like animals don't farm and stuff.
Right.
And so like the population would exceed the capacity for their environment, and like that was a problem. And he was right about that, but he's not right about people.
Right. People would, intelligent enough can like figure out what to do. Like, but that's why you have things like Louisiana, like go kill a bunch of hogs. Like they'll give you all kinds of passes to kill hogs in Louisiana because they'll just like
Well, and then
overpopulate.
if there was like a bunch of people that were starving and stuff, other people wouldn't have kids as much. So like it wouldn't keep
Right.
increasing if there wasn't enough food. in the
Right.
system.
Yeah.
About the population thing, how like increased from like not much to like 7 billion.
Right.
Like you were saying exponentially. Like isn't there like an S curve or something like that, like biology theory or something like that, where it's like
There's
like
there's
S-
an S
S
curve
and J.
that comes up and falls, and then there's a J curve that's just exponential.
yeah, so like aren't we like on like just a part of the S curve? Because it seems like we would have to get to that.
I have not seen projections anytime soon of us slowing down.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's like with
Probably what
it's kind of like what Mimi said. When times become harsher, suddenly population will slow its increase. But when times are good and we can make more food, then it's like, oh, I can have more children.
Right.
It's fine.
So it kind of naturally fixes itself.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a self-feeding process.
Right. He does bring up early on in that essay about the marriage issue, and this is something we talked about a while back, that this is kind of a key concept, but the idea is that, like, a lot of those marriage, he talks about that, a lot of those marriage controls are gone now by the time he's writing about this. And we mentioned that, like, by 1750 onward, people moving to cities get away from those marriage controls, which does lead the population boom, that's something we talk about in here. So, like, he is right about that. There's been a big increased population because of the lacks of marriage controls. Right, exactly. But he was wrong about his long-term projections. Then you have this other guy, this is new, so we didn't go over this yesterday. Then you have David Ricardo. David Ricardo is also in this negative thinking about population. He was an economist with even more pessimistic view. He develops an idea called the law of iron wages. So Ricardo develops this idea called the law of iron wages. So Ricardo develops this concept called the law of iron wages. He believed that after an extended period of time, because of the pressure of population growth, wages would always sink to subsistence levels. So basically, the more population grows, wages will continuously sink lower and lower. Because you'll always have plenty of workers, thus there's no incentive to, like, pay them more for their skills because they're easily replaceable, right? So he believes that over an extended period of time, with more population growth, wages would just sink lower and lower. And wages would basically always stay just high enough to keep them from starving. So they would always just stay just high enough to keep people from starving. What? Think he's right? I think in a pure capital society, sure.
It's more complex than that because, I mean, you also have, like, skilled workers and workers who have
Right.
education who can, work for more money.
And this is very early industrial revolution where, there wasn't a lot of that yet. But, like, eventually governments realized that could be the case, which is why you see later on regulation. But that's kind of way down the line,
I
right?
think even, like, it's just disregarding demand. More people means, like, they want more, so you can build more industries that can employ more
Right,
people.
more jobs and, right.
Right.
Okay, right. So, yeah, I mean, that's true too, yes.
It's just like, especially within the Industrial Revolution, now that we have new inventions that are creating these whole new fields of jobs that no one thought would be available.
Right. You couldn't fathom them being there, essentially.
Right. Now we can support more people with
Right.
more wage.
I'm just waiting until eventually they have a job where the robot teaches y'all, and then I just, like, sit in the back with, like, shotgun, monitoring, make sure that nothing happens.
Wait,
That's what I'm waiting to
so
happen.
who's the shotgun for?
The children, so they don't attack the robot, or if the robot gets out of control, for the robot.
See, I think it's for the robot anyway. not for the-
It's full of rubber pellets, so either way, it's not going to kill anybody.
Well, you
Right.
could have said that first.
Hold on.
He
Not
understands
far.
something.
It's an airsoft.
Wait,
It's
how
a lot
far-
Exactly.
how far is it thought into?
I'm just saying, think about the future when the robots are teaching y'all, and then we just got to monitor and fix them. Like, that's our job, right?
Well, that wouldn't be you because you're not like a mechanic.
But then I'll have to do that because then my job will be obsolete, right?
So you think you could just like once you're
Yeah.
really old, you think you can just learn.
But what about
to take
when
care
Right.
of your own?
Exactly. What's that?
What about when the robots become the mechanics?
Then he becomes a mechanic robot.
Becomes a robot.
There you go. So Malthus, Ricardo, and others were eventually proven wrong with industrialization because productivity will go beyond what anybody ever imagined. So like they were very early on writing about all this, so they did not realize how things would change, but they were very early voices about the problems you could see with industrialization. Okay. So what we're moving on to now, this is not, it's kind of the textbook, but not quite. We're looking now at industrialization in France and Prussia specifically. So we'll look at France first. Well, first we'll look at national and international variations. We're going to France. So a new tech and a new organizational labor revolutionized Britain, and other countries begin to notice and begin to try to copy it. So Britain's first, by far, like way out ahead of everybody else, and then other countries begin to try to copy and do similar changes, especially once the Napoleonic Wars are done, because most of the continent of Europe was all consumed with those wars for about 15 years, and then once that's finally done, 18 teens onward, these other countries can kind of begin to push forward with copying things that Britain had done. And it's not just Europe. Obviously, like Japan and America will have some limited implementation of manufacturing as well in the same time. So let's look at national and international variations. So you see this table that shows some data on industrial production and how it grows differently in different countries over time. A Swiss scholar made this chart. So you see at this time it only goes to like 1913. So it kind of shows you how things change up until just like World War I, not until forever. The chart gives a comparison of how much industrial product was produced on average for each person, each country per year. So basically, when the chart was made, they had the maximum amount be 100 and 1900. So like 1900 was like the base year. So you see that the UK had 100 and 1900, which basically when the chart was made. And then you kind of see later on, you know, how that gets surpassed by World War II. Okay, World War I, sorry. Impact of growth. So a few different things here to show impact of growth. Number one, it shows in 1750, all countries in Europe and elsewhere are fairly close together. So this chart shows in 1750 that most countries, except for Britain, was a little bit ahead. All countries were pretty much the same starting place in 1750. So this chart indicates in 1750 that all countries in Europe were pretty much at the same starting point. It also shows you that places like China and Japan were also strong too because there was a lot of reliance on those countries for their goods. So Europe, mid-1700s, trades a lot with Asian countries like China and Japan as well, and they're on the same plane as Europeans at this point.
What is the numbers?
It's just, there's not really a unit. It's just basically like level of production, so whatever you want to call it.
But is it like percentage based on a certain standard, or?
Well, that's what I was saying. It's based on how much production per person a year, basically. So like how much availability or whatever essentially there is. Right. So it's just basically like I don't know exactly all the numbers that go into it. It's kind of like just an industrial checker. I don't know how to explain it. So don't worry about it. You're not going to be testing on this, but just be aware that it just kind of shows you how production grew at the time. Number two, for impact of growth, this chart also shows Western countries emulated the British model successfully. So this chart also shows you how Western European countries emulated the British style very successfully. Because that's what we're going to talk about later on too, is that Eastern Europe and a lot of Southern Europe areas are not as successful.
Emulated British what?
A lot of other Western European countries successfully adopted the British system to grow their production levels. Like look at Britain and how it grows to like 16, 25, 60, 47. No one's really close, but the closest countries are going to be like Belgium and France, and then later Germany. So those Western countries are going to be the ones that are most successful behind Britain. But this also kind of shows you Britain was like 3 times as successful as like some of those other countries. So they were like way out ahead. Whereas these other countries were better, second, third place, but they weren't anywhere close to first place. So Belgium, France, the German territories, they got stronger and stronger as time goes on. You also see the United States has big growth, especially after what event? Now, in the 1800s. Civil War, right? So the U.S. is kind of middling until you hit Civil War. So this is about Civil War time, then it starts to shoot up dramatically, right? So our production levels take off after the Civil War in the United States. But the other thing to take away from this, the last thing to take away from impact of growth, is that Eastern and Southern European countries were dragging behind. So by the time you get to 1900, a lot of those other countries were not anywhere near the production levels of these other countries. All right, non-Western growth. So it's also important to understand that for a long time, India and China were very dominant in the world markets because they could produce a lot of demanded goods. But when industrialization happens, and they don't basically do industrialization, then their numbers actually decrease. You see that all the European countries increase. Even if it's not a lot, they all increase. China and Japan, they essentially go down. Now, they'll go down at first, for the most part, in Japan, or they kind of stay stagnant. They're going to have a big industrial development in the late 1800s, and they'll be big by like close to World War II times. But China essentially gets worse and worse. China's industrialization gets worse and worse going into the 1900s. So there's a decline there for them. So a lot of these non-Western, non-European countries, there's going to be a lot of stagnation or decline once they don't get into industrialization. So Europe industrialized to a greater extent than most of these other countries. Japan is one of the few exceptions that's not the United States, because they eventually do allow for some Western influence and allow for adoption of like industrialization, but that doesn't really happen until like the 70s and 80s of that century. But you see like Mexico, India, Brazil, those areas just not, they barely register, right? So this chart shows you the existing inequalities between Europe and the rest of the world. And it just kind of puts in perspective how industrialized Britain was. But who comes out on top? Yeah! Woo! So America eventually surpasses it by World War I times. So, all right. Yeah. All right, lastly, before moving on, so we're going to have a shift now towards industrialization in the continent of Europe, beyond just Great Britain. So before we get into France, just kind of a general summary of the continent of Europe. During the 1700s, it was a period of agricultural improvement. So during the 1700s, it was a period of agricultural improvement, population increase. So it was a period of agricultural improvement, population increase, as we talked about, expanding foreign trade, and growing industry. So Europe will be kind of slowed down by not doing the cottage industry right off the bat, and also the Napoleonic Wars. Those wars in Europe kind of keep them behind, but kind of 1815 and beyond, other countries can now successfully begin to emulate or copy what Britain is doing to try to catch up to what they're doing in their country. All that revolution upheaval that took place for a while slowed their abilities, but eventually they were able to keep up. So let's look at industrialization in France. That's where we're going to go next, looking at industrialization in France. So industrialization took place mostly after 1815 in France. Industrialization took place mostly after 1815 in France. And unlike Britain, France does not have a lot of reserve coal and iron. So France does not have a lot of reserve coal and iron like Britain does. And like I said, that's a big factor in why some countries are more successful than others. Just the sheer dumb luck if you have these resources or not. Case in point, Russia. Russia does try to industrialize some, and they have a buttload of resources. They just never really tap into them. So when they finally decide to get serious, like under Stalin in the 1920s, now they kill a few people along the way, just a few, right? But they go from like being kind of this low industrialized country within 10 years being the number 2 industrial country in the world. So if you have the resources in your own territory, it can be a dramatic effect, right? Like with Russia. Anyway, most of their iron and coal were in fields near Belgium. So they were kind of close up to the northern border near Belgium. That's all they really had. You can kind of get some of that, maybe kind of detect some of that from this chart here. Luxury goods like silk, tapestries. You know what tapestry is? Yeah, like a cloth fabric on the wall. Porcelain and car furniture were most of France's modest industry. So 1700s, going into the Revolution period, that's pretty much what France's industry was. Luxury items. Things like silk, tapestries, porcelain, and car furniture. So I had that down. Is that basically like going into the Revolution? That was like their only industries, and they weren't that big. Luxury items: silks, tapestries, porcelain, car furniture. Wealthy wealthy aristocrats mostly produce the goods, but the revolution that goes on for 10, 15 years disrupts a lot of this production. So they kind of hit a wall with the revolution in the 80s and 90s. All right, look at Napoleon's reforms. So Napoleon comes in, and unsurprisingly, he's going to be able to start kind of inching France in that direction they need to be in for industrialization. So Napoleon is laying the groundwork for French industrial growth. But it's not just like Britain where it's like, let's produce whatever we want, let's produce the things we think is best. The thing that he wants to produce are things that benefit his government, his army, right? So he needs a lot of cloth for uniforms, a lot of weapons, essentially. So that's where the focus is. So he needs a lot of weapons, needs a lot of uniforms. So that's kind of where they begin to industrialize in France. So initial production is made to meet military demands, not so much just consumer demand. In addition to this, he also supported innovations that helped modernize France. So as we kind of talked about, Napoleon does push for better education for everybody. He does push for better education for everybody, not women, but So he is pushing for better education for everyone. In education, there'd be like their high school version or like their college version, pushing for more like science, math, engineering type stuff. So they're pushing for more science, math, engineering type one. That would help to modernize them. Architecture as well. Because this wants us to lead to like better transportation. And why does he better transportation? Right, military control and all that, right? So it's gonna lead to more canals, roads, and bridges, but not for like the same reason Britain's doing. Does that make sense? Right? So it's gonna develop, gonna have people be more educated to help develop things like roads, canals, bridges, but it's not gonna be for like just generic industrialization. It's more for his own benefit for controlling military expansion and so forth. Right?